Great, let's start. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Jayant here with us. Let me give you a bit of background as to what we're looking to explore as a topic today, and also about a brief about me, and also to know more about Jayant sir. I am Vice Chairman of Young Leaders Council of AIMA, and I have a day job also to work with SPJMR Academic Institution. I work as the director there for one of the initiatives there. And I'm so excited to have Jayant here. Jayant has a very vast profile that I can talk about. He's been, the CEO, ED, and COO of NSDC, National Skill Development Corporation. But he also comes with not just the government side of the work. He also has a very vast career in the corporate side. He's worked with Tata's for a long while. And he's also Group CEO of UK India Business Chamber of Commerce, which is doing the bridge between the UK and Indian commerce side. And also, he's the founding CEO of Fast India, which is looking at bringing in more focus in the science and technology academia side. Thank you so much for joining us, Jayant, here. It's a pleasure to have you here. And the topic itself is so interesting and so close to my heart to talk about the skill development and the impact of that. When we look at leveraging our India's thriving demographics, and how do we really ensure that we have the right kind of demographic dividend yield coming out of that, right? That's I think we've the connotation that generally the West uses is that India has missed the demographic dividend bus multiple times. But I think the current outlook is that we're still on track to achieve significant strides on the demographic dividend yield. So I'd like to probably have a double click on your background. If you can share a bit more about what was your role as CEO of NSDC, and what is your role in the skill development mission of the Prime Minister of India?
Yeah, thank you, Santosh. It's a pleasure being at the AIMA Young Leaders Council show today. So very clearly, today, as we all know, China's population, we have overtaken China's population. We have become slightly more populous than China. I'm not too sure whether there's a record to be ashamed of or to be proud of. But very, very clearly, a lot can be done through this population, which I will talk in due course of time. Since you've asked me to tell something more about myself. So I was a typical corporate sector guy. Bulk of my career has been, when Tata's had set up a management consulting practice. This was the early 90s when the economic liberalization had happened, led by Dr. Manmohan Singh as the then finance minister, and with Mr. Narasimha Rao as the prime minister. At that time, a lot of MNCs were looking at opportunities, were knocking the doors of India. And many of them had a very, and until such time, let's not forget, most MNCs, most countries thought that India is a country of snake charmers, beggars, and so on and so forth. And they wanted to quickly scan the environment. They wanted to, and those who were a little more advanced, they wanted to have a market entry strategy into the country, and so on and so forth. And the big four consulting firms in the country had still not set shops. They had operations in their audit and accounts practice, but not in the management consulting. So Tata's took this lead, and I remember we had about 250 to 300 consultants, a very strong practice. We did the work for a lot of MNCs, including some multilateral agencies like World Bank, UNICEF, UNDP, and so on, so ADB, and so on and so forth. So that's where in the real sense, the career started. And then I moved on to TCS, the tech company, the Tata Consultancy Services. And, I had a bit of a tech orientation, and that's how, this transition happened. And, like a typical techie, I went through several, roles as a project leader, as a group leader, and so on and so forth. I also, I was the regional director for UK and Ireland for 3 verticals. I was also, the business relationship manager for one of the customers of TCS, which during my tenure became the 4th or 5th largest perhaps account of TCS worldwide. And I also headed their life sciences and and a healthcare practice. At that time, it was a combined practice and in Europe. I looked at many other opportunities. One thing which I take a lot of pride, for is in the global delivery center which I headed. The actual work for the passport seva, transformation happened. As an Indian, that fills my heart with a lot of pride. Those of you who would have gone to a passport seva before the transmission, we all used to feel as if we are lesser mortals being an Indian to be subjected to such insult and pain. In those queues where nobody listened, people were not even treated as human beings. And now you are. It's a complete transformation, not just a software development, but a complete what should they look and feel, what kind of furniture you should have, what kind of facilities you should have, what kind of steps you should have, what kind of amenities should be available to a citizen who's going there, and so on and so forth. And how do you eliminate middlemen who are there in great numbers, So later, in my later part of my career, one additional responsibility was given to me over and above my business responsibility, to look after the corporate social responsibility. And I still remember my CEO, he told me that, was not all India, it was in the northern states, And, I was told that this is an add-on responsibility that you'll have to do beyond your 8 or 10 or 12. IT's working hours could be very, very ridiculous sometimes. So beyond 10 to 12 hours of your normal work, you could spend some time on corporate social responsibility. But few things which I did, which was it changed the course of my career altogether. In the sense, I worked on with some jails and some other districts, for adult literacy. They used discarded computers and created a functional literacy model that TCS. In fact, Mr. F.C. Kohli, who was the founder of TCS and the first CEO, and many call him as the father of Indian IT industry. I had a good fortune of working very closely with him. And so we started several districts in the country had become, from a, 50% literacy became fully literate, and so on and so forth. We worked on that. And that's what I thought that, going forward, the choice I have is to let my career go through the typical corporate ladder, and you'll have more money, more responsibilities, more promotions, more this kind of a thing. So the TCS CEO, Mr. S. Ramadurai, he was picked up by the then Prime Minister to be his advisor for skill development in the country. And he was given a cabinet minister's rank to spearhead that. And there was no single ministry for skill development. It was all split in about 20 odd ministries. And so he knew that there's hardly anybody in the government he can lay his hands on. So he picked up, 4 or 5 of us from different Tata companies, whom he knew had a lot of passion for skills, for education, and so on and so forth. And he gave us a complete free hand to work at various reforms. I personally had an opportunity to champion, the apprenticeship reforms, which is a law. As a law, it used to be cursed by the industry. And, I did a simple thing, went to some 200 corporates, both manufacturing, service sector, large MSMEs, and found out, and tried to find out what their pain areas were with respect to the Apprenticeship Act. And then we worked with the government. I chaired a Ministry of Labor committee, a task force for rationalization of apprenticeship. And finally, it resulted into a new act of parliament in towards end of 2014. So I think National Skills Qualification Framework, when that was happening, I was not the main person, but I contributed to its development. I'll tell you later as to what this framework means. So I think these kind of things I did. And when the opportunity came, then I took a plunge, left Tata's and joined. So all this work I did while I was still paid by TCS you can say it was an informal secondment mode. I had some residual responsibilities in TCS, which I could manage, but almost 70% of my time, 2/3 of my time I was spending actually on the skill development sector of the country. I would have done it for about 4 or 5 years. Then next 4 years or so, I took I actually joined the sector, joined the government, National Skill Development Corporation that runs bulk of the Skill India mission. I joined them as their CEO. and worked on lots of things, including Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, which is the world's largest skill development initiative undertaken by any country in the history of mankind. It had its problems, but also it had its own successes. So I think, this life comes to you, but for once, it's choice is ours. Either we drift through it, or we make a difference. I think so that's the reason I transitioned, and not too many people know. When I took this transition, I took a cut in my package and so on and so forth. But it was very, very important. But the sense of I had my own ups and downs in the government, but the sense of empowerment, the sense of scale that you work on, and part of what you work at, whatever becomes a success story, it gives you the kind of kick, the kind of thrill you get. Believe me, no amount of financial raise, no number of promotions and so on and so forth, or career jumps can give you in a corporate sector. So I'm very, very happy having done that. And then as Santosh said, I had stints, not very long, but shorter stints at 3 other organizations, which is UK India Business Council. I was their first non-Britisher group CEO based in Delhi and not in London. This was all during the early days of COVID. And then I joined the Foundation for Advancing Science and Technology, and we tried to look at reforms which can trigger, which can make India an innovation-led economy rather than just the 5th largest or 3rd largest or whatever number you may assign it. But we are hardly an economy known for innovation, and it needs some big-ticket reforms. And after I left the government, I actually worked for a US think tank called CSIS as a senior fellow. And I was funded by another Silicon Valley nonprofit, and I worked for them as their executive director for public policy. And I had a short about a year and a half stint with them, and all we did was to work at reforms which can trigger employment, which can see government. I had worked on the supply side. How do you skill people? This was demand side. How do you create demand? I remember the question used to be that if our economy is growing at let's say 6%, 7% per annum, how come job market is not growing at the same pace? So where is the slack happening, and so on and so forth, and what reforms can happen? And finally, a presentation was made to the Prime Minister on the work, largely on the work I had done for over a year. So I think this is a quick background. If I have any regrets having changed the course of my trajectory, the trajectory of my career midway, I have none. The sense of contribution one gets, the sense of fulfillment that one gets. I'm not saying you don't get the same in corporate sector, but the scale is not the same, and the impact on the country is not the same. Santosh, sorry for a very long answer but you asked this question at your own peril by telling me about my career.
No, it's really important, and for our audience to know who they're listening to. Often our LinkedIn profiles are not the best explanatory profile, I would say, right? So given the constraint that we have in the social media side, but I think it's really important for all of us to understand, why you are such an authority to speak on the skill development side. So one interesting thing that I gathered from this conversation, when you shared about your interview, is that I connect this back to my conversation with Dr. Pramod Verma, who's been leading the Aadhaar stack with Nandan Nilekani, and also a couple of other folks who've been very closely involved in this ecosystem building. Like I said, I think it's the excitement and the satisfaction around the impact that you can create for a country as large as India. And anything that we do, I lived in Chile, and in Santiago, the whole population of the city was about 40 lakhs. And I would say that there's probably like a 3 pin code area in Bangalore, right? That's the population scale that we talk about. And anything we do in India is always at a grand scale, and nothing can beat that in any other country in the world, right? That's very imperative in the way that we function. So you need to ensure that you're doing something that is not just grand for the namesake, but also has much larger impact on individual folks that are out there who might be recipient of the work that we are doing. And I'm so glad to have you here. And discuss about this topic, right? So that China has taken over India, and like you said, it's a conundrum. You don't know if it is seen as a positive. I mean, sorry, India has overtaken China in terms of population. It's a conundrum thinking that are we excited to have that kind of a population explosion, or is it seen on a negative trend that even a large country like China has been able to control its population while we haven't been successful on that. There's a common saying or a quote that says overpopulation leads to over exploitation of resources, and India has always had over the last a century or so we've lived under terrible constraints on resources, natural as well as non-natural resources that we are in. How do you see this? From your point of view and from your conversation that you had within the uh, North Bloc government circles, I would say, is this seen as a positive trend? I mean, is this seen as a worrisome trend?
Sorry, what trend, Santosh, you talked about? Could you repeat?
The population that and the overpopulation conundrum that we are speaking about. Do we see that as a positive thing? At least that we don't enforce anything on our people. We let them choose their family size vis-a-vis what China did in terms of curtailing down through the policy push. Is that seen as a positive side, or is it seen as a negative side that we are currently maybe the largest populated country?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Santosh. Actually, it's a double-edged sword. If you educate your people well, if you skill your people well, you could reach reap a rich demographic dividend. If you don't, then the same dividend doesn't take kickoff, and we as a nation could even be prepared for a demographic disaster. Since you talked about China, let me compare and contrast. Go back into history. See, China embarked upon their economic reforms in the year 1978 or 79. Around that time frame, they embarked upon what we did in 1991. So if you look at, there was a 12 to 13-year phase lag between India and China embarking upon their respective economic reforms, kind of thing. And China's reforms were also very, very successful. Investment started flowing in and so on and so forth. And by the way, Indian economic reforms were also quite successful. Although we, being a democracy, few things which the nation would have wanted to do, couldn't do, but still our reforms were very successful. Where we failed was China, after the wealth the country had created, after a decade of economic reforms, they plowed that money back into their higher education and vocational training institutions. Big time, they plowed that money. And today, if you look at any international ranking, Chinese universities feature there very, very prominently. India, despite the success of our economic reforms, for lack of political consensus or whatever it is, or coalition governments at that point of time, or whatever, I don't want to go into that. But typically what happened, we did not plow that money big time. I mean, money, it's not that you spend 3% on education, you'll spend 4%. A very, very substantive jump in universities, in technical education, in vocational training, in research and development labs. They pegged it up very substantially. And China doesn't declare its figures, but some people say that at the peak of the success, after the success of their economic reforms in science and technology itself, the research and development in science and technology, they started spending almost 4% of their GDP. Education, again, a very, very substantive percentage of their GDP. They almost doubled the outlay. So I think that we did not do, and therefore it's a mistake we have done. So different countries, if you look at their trajectory, they had a cycle of almost 40 to 50 years, almost half a century to do up their skill development story. India had missed the bus for a very, very, very long time to do. So we have the seriousness started barely 15 years ago in the skill development sector. I would say it started in 2008-9 framework. It started when my understanding is it started when the late Professor C.K. Prahlad from University of Michigan, when he came to India at the invitation of the Prime Minister under a mission called India at 75. So he tried to evangelize that what kind of country we would like to see when independent India becomes 75-year-old in the year 2022. And he said, we need so many Nobel laureates, we need this and we need that. And, along with that, he said we'll need, he did not do any detailed study, but it was more of a back of envelope calculation. Plus GDP at that point of time was also, the growth was almost 8 to 9%, And so he said that we'll need 500 million, which is 50 crore skilled people by the year 2022, when independent India becomes 75-year-old. So that's where the seriousness started, and some reforms started happening. Otherwise, skill development was largely confined to ITIs, industrial training institutes, and at best the polytechnics. And these two were also under different ministries. One was under Ministry of Labor, and the other one was under the Ministry of the then Ministry of Human Resource Development, which is Ministry of Education now. So I think. So let's see which way it goes. I see some seriousness. So I would say a decade ago, when we were skilling as a country barely 10 lakh people per annum, that number has crossed and has, now it's almost a little over a crore. So number-wise, it's a quantum leap which the country has been able to achieve. Is the leap big enough? No, it's not big enough. We need to take a much steeper leap. And more importantly, I think this quality has to become an article of faith. The entire number which is happening, may not have as good a quality as we as a nation would like to have. I'm talking about the quality of skill development, quality of training. So I think it's a mixed bag, and I would feel if we still, and let me tell you this, it is not a endless window of opportunity for India. This demographic dividend story. It's not that, we can sit, relax, and we'll do it later. My belief is, different economists have different calculations. My feeling is, unless we fix it up in whatever is left of this decade, which is half a decade left, and next decade, if we don't leverage it, it will start dwindling. Because if you look at our population growth rate has come down now already. We were not as aggressive being a democracy as China's one child policy. But as education is spreading and so on and so forth, and healthcare services are improving, although slowly, our growth rate has also reduced. So I think surely it's a far cry from becoming a negative growth rate. So we'll also at some point of time would start becoming an aging society, population, unlike today when we are the only major economy with such a young workforce, and the average the age of our workforce being almost 27, 28, 29 years, in that bracket. So it's not an endless window of opportunity. There has to be a sense of urgency. And that's when I recently met, the new Minister of State for Skill Development, who has an independent charge, Mr. Jayant Chaudhary. That's what I said, that this is one of the most important tasks in the country, because, and let me tell you, it's not just demographic dividend. If you do not educate, and more than education, because in education, there is still some critical mass. If we don't train our people well, if we don't have vocational skills, if we don't have these kind of things, it will adversely impact all other sectors, the growth of all other sectors. The pandemic happened. The world started looking at relocating their manufacturing supply chains in destinations other than China, right? We could get some of those investments, fortunately, but not as much as we as a country would have liked to do. And I have reasons to believe that lack of skills, especially in Industry 4.0 technologies and some of the more automated manufacturing lines, we still have significant gaps there, and that's the reason we could not garner much of it. So this is a horizontal Skill India mission, or this is skill development as a sector which will adversely affect all the sectors, not just a matter of demographic dividend.
I have plenty of questions around these things. So maybe I'll start with comparing India vis-a-vis the Western world and some of the developed economies, right? So most developed economies, they started with manufacturing. Since you mentioned that manufacturing as their first leap of growth, economic development, and then they moved to the service sector. India's story has been inverse, right? We started growing on the service side, and now we are flipping, and we are trying to stabilize and improve our manufacturing side. Is this the right way to tackle that, or should we look at what the other part of the world has looked at? And since we are already in service, should we double click and move faster on the service side than now propelling our manufacturing?
So service sector is very important for us because that's where bulk of the employment numbers come, right? There is no way we can neglect that. But when people say manufacturing has to go a step to be stepped up, undoubtedly it has to be stepped up. But it doesn't have to be stepped up at the cost of service sector, right? Service sector still has between manufacturing and service sector for every crore of investment, it creates more jobs. And even in absolute terms, service sector is a much bigger employer. IT enabled services, banking, financial services, insurance, all these sectors which constitute service sector put together. So manufacturing, yes, we have to have a greater focus on that. And I would believe that India, I think today the percentage is about 17% of our GDP comes from manufacturing sector. I think we cannot rest unless we take quantum leap there, and almost 23-24%, or if not 25% of our GDP comes from manufacturing. So government has taken some steps, to be fair to it. The PLI, the production linked incentive scheme that they started, if memory doesn't fail me, almost 14 sectors are covered there. So and a lot of good investments have come to avail that benefit. But let's understand, more than the benefit, what is important for manufacturing to take off is, incentives are like calipers, right? I mean, you can't keep using it all your life, right? All your life. So it is good to give the economy a kickstart, give manufacturing a kickstart. But eventually, we have to look at our own infrastructure development. We have to look at our ease of doing business. I'm happy that ease of doing business has taken a quantum leap. It used to be 100 plus rank of India as a country, has become 63 now. I think last time when the full survey was done. And I'm sure if you do it today, it would have improved a few notches above. But is this good enough? That's what the question is. If we are the fifth largest economy by nominal GDP in absolute terms and third largest already by purchasing power parity, why shouldn't we aspire to be among the top 10 ease of doing business nations in terms of ranking? Why shouldn't we have that? So I think our aspirations there have to be very, 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 very important. And other thing, what? Some of the other roles that I've seen investors, especially the overseas ones, they don't want that, rules of the game. See, when they engage with the country, when they invest, when the FDI comes, there are certain rules of the game through which they decide, right? But they want a certain regulatory certainty in the country, right? Regulations can't keep changing. Major laws can't keep changing, because it upsets their business case altogether, right? So I think that's very important. And this government, have every reason to believe does understand that. And one reason why in Modi 3.0, what you see today, the four key ministries, including, I would say even fifth, the economic ministries, the finance ministry continues to be the same. The commerce and industry minister, when I say ministry, ministers continue to be the same. Even external affairs, defense, home, they all continue to be the same. Because has to be some policy continuity. There has to be. We don't have a time for ministers to go through their learning curve once again. We have to get cracking, deliver. So I think that's a brighter side of it. One thing, since you asked, Santosh, manufacturing and PLI is a good scheme, but much of that PLI is being an incentive has gone to sectors where there's a huge degree of automation. We may have become the world's largest Samsung. For Samsung, for example, India, the manufacturing facility in India is the single largest they have anywhere in the world, right? Apple, we are second only to China now, right? So I think these are good, but the level of automation in these sectors is so high that the job creation potential is not as much as one would like to be associated with such big brands and tech companies world over. So I think some of the sectors where still employment, those are manufacturing sectors I'm talking about, which are still very, very employment centric, because waves of technology have not affected it that materially. I'll give you, apparel, garment manufacturing, kind of a thing. And even leather, these are the sectors where still the employment centricity of investment is huge, 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 So I think that is what we need to look at and expand PLI till the time this incentive is required to such sectors, which have a huge employment creation.
Now, moving ahead in the conversation, so the governments obviously have certain resource constraints. So you have the same pie that you need to allocate to different sectors or investments that are required. So on one end, what we look at is a certain amount is spent on the education, but we also need to, in the era of advent of AI, we need to push in a certain amount of spending towards higher education, higher innovation, complexities are required, which is also very important for a country like us, where we need to be energy secure. We need to be, given the kind of geopolitical scenario that we live in, we need to ensure that we are not dependent or taken for granted by our neighbors. So there's a certain investment that you need to do on these high-end technologies, which are not really job creation oriented activities. On the other side, while the education sector itself is struggling, we're talking about creating vocational training, and so take the example of what Tata Strive does, right? So they do a lot of activity and support from the corporate social responsibility side to help people engage on the vocational side. In Bangalore, we have Nudge, which is now doing a pretty good job on the skill development side to create vocational employment or employment-ready people in India. There's certainly a huge mismatch in terms of the quantum of spending, in terms of the quantum of output that will come out, and also the quantum of skill set that is going to come out, right? And that is also, if you look at it from the prism of lens of inequality that exists in the country, right? We are still pushing ahead and increasing that inequality. What is your take on how to reduce inequality while we still continue to be competitive in the AI world, while I'm still able to provide the employment? Because for the government, recently we've seen how the elections turned the tables on the current incumbent government, where the job creation was one of the massive points that was getting debated across. How does the government, because you worked inside the circles, how does the government really manage this balance between investment in new technologies vis-a-vis low-end vocational training and still maintaining the balance there? Sir, I think you're muted.
So Santosh, so far the focus has been on lower end of the vocational skills, kind of a thing. But why should it be confined to lower end? Why should it be confined to carpentry and electrician and plumber and welder and so on and so forth? The problem is most of the mindset that we have is still ITI centric. The kind of job roles which ITIs used to have. The new generation, the NSDC, Sector Skill Council ecosystem did bring a lot of new generation job roles, but it needs to be stepped up. The pace has to be stepped up. That's very, very important. If you look at AI, where is AI except some of the older IITs and some of the, some private sector, where is AI even taught properly? From a checklist point of view, most computer science courses or even information technology courses would have some component of AI, right? But do they have the teachers? Do they have the faculty members who can teach, who themselves understand what AI is, And even if you assume that at least some, gyan is given to them, but what about lower skills? AI is not always a top-end research-centric. AI is all pervasive. It is used in every sector. Where is for example, AI deployment in education, AI deployment in healthcare, AI deployment in delivery of certain services. So where who is thinking that? I think that's one area where Internet of Things, 3D printing, there's a whole lot of new generation technologies where we still do not have adequate numbers for people to. So I think that needs to be stepped up. I do not see it being a dispute that lower end versus higher end. All have to happen. If you are setting up a manufacturing unit, investor looks at all kinds of skills, the very basic auto mechanic, welding, electrician, those kind of skills, and even higher end skills, industry 4.0 technologies and their skills. So all that has to happen. And what will happen if you do not get into new generation skills, if you do not get into industry 4.0 technology skills, if you do not embrace them in good numbers, then what will happen? The newer investments that come to India, when they look at the number game, when they do their mathematics, they'll always find that these skills they will not have. So what will happen? If a German company is trying to come here or US company is trying to come here, people having those skills are surely not going to move from Germany or US, right? They expect those skills to be available locally, So that sometimes becomes a roadblock in them making those investments. So I think, all India is such a huge country, a country of 140 crore people. All these, skilling lower end, higher end, all kinds of things have to happen together. And we don't have to play a blind game. They have to be very, very serious, skill gap studies in different sectors, in different parts of the country. The other challenge, Santosh,
Have there been, sorry to cut you, have there been skill gap studies already
so there
done?
were, I'm aware of some studies which were done in, from 2003 to 2008, 2013 to 2018 kind of time frame. PricewaterhouseCoopers had done some studies, where skill gaps in key sectors were calculated, and then they were also refreshed later, because these are not static. What you compute 5 years back may not hold good today. So I'm not aware as to what's happening now, but I'm sure in some form or the other, government is looking at skill gaps, so that what will happen if you do a blind game. If you leave it to the private sector, I'm talking about not the industrial the industry groups, but a lot of people who are into the business of training. If you leave it to them, they would be investing more in asset light training programs, where their outlay goes down, right? And yet they get the same kind of money from the government for running those programs, kind of thing. So it has to be a number, very, very well calibrated number. And then it has to have a proper balance and split of those numbers across the country, also across the geographies, right? I mean, let's understand. I mean, because skilled, many of these skilled jobs are still not as well paying. So for an Assamese boy to relocate in Maharashtra doesn't happen that seamlessly. And there have been numerous cases where many of these people were placed in distant geographies within the country. And after a while, they develop, they didn't like the weather, they didn't like the food, and, they didn't like, the community with whom they used to engage, and they couldn't develop bridge that gap. And many of them go back also, right? So I think it has to both ways, it has to, at every, and it has to be district level. I remember the study that which was done. It was done at district level. District levels gaps are very, very important. So as to, some migration would happen, but you can reduce the migration to an extent possible, And for India, let's look at the other aspect of it. All this, the entire world is a stage for Indian workers, right? I mean, why? I mean, if ITS industry could take the lead, and it took the lead, some 40, 50 years ago, right? I mean, what stops us from, doing it in others? I mean, I'll give you some. I mean, I had an opportunity at some point of time to speak to meet the Prime Minister, and I told him, even some areas which may not sound very upmarket, like facilities management, right? I mean, if you look at a lot of people in these countries in the Western world, they do not want to work in facilities management area. And in India, we have a problem of plentiful. I mean, there are a lot of people who are not able to meet both ends there, and so why can't we capture a major chunk of that market all over the world? It may not give you the kind of revenues which software services give you, but still there are more spaces. I mean, carpentry. I mean, all these areas are huge opportunity for Indians, and we can, and and it does a lot of good to the economy. People earn there, they support their families, their purchasing power goes up. In India, money is repatriated, and so on and so forth. So I think India can't be a nation where one solution fits all will not work. We have to try multiple things together in a very, very well calibrated manner. And I'm very hopeful. I'm a born optimist. I'm very hopeful that India would do it if the sector remains with the right people and with the right intent and with the right policy decisions and so on and so forth. And a much, 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 much bigger role for the industry. The problem is industry does a fantastic quality of skilling, right? But the problem is they do it for their own employees or for their own trainees. If they can extend the same under some cost sharing basis to the community at large. Some have done like Tata Strive you talked about, and I've seen Bosch. You were talking about Nudge, there are examples, but we have to ramp up. We need big numbers. That's very important.
So two important topics to discuss further from the conversation that you mentioned. One, you mentioned about Germany and the Western world at the start of your conversation now. So Germany has a dual vocational training program, right? So on the job and also through the vocational training schools. India's ITI model hasn't been that great a success. Is there a parallel model today in the newer age that we are looking at? Is there anything that you have done as part of your NSTC assignment?
So German model essentially is called the dual system, as you rightly said. Typically, what happens, almost 3 to 4 days a week, you work on the shop floor, either the main shop floor of the factory or an allied shop floor, which is there for after sales service and things like that, or created specially for this. And there the people work and soil their hands and learn the hard way, right? And only 1 to 2 days, 1.5 days a week, they study in the classroom, right? Kind of a thing. And that's the reason. And almost 70% of German workforce comes through that, this thing. And therefore, Germany is known, the quality of products, I would say Germany is second to none in the quality of products. Look at the roads, their highways, they are very different, and so everybody believes, even competing countries believe that the German dual system is perhaps the best skilling model all over the world. So our ITI system, the way it is constructed, we may keep trying, but it will never be able to replicate the German dual system. I mean, to my mind, the system which is closest to the dual system in India is called the apprenticeship program, which needs to be done, because apprenticeship again is that soiling your hands, on the shop floor and learning the hard way, or in the office environment, you learn as an apprentice and then move forward. So I think that is closest to that, and the reforms which happened through the amendment in the Act in the late 2014 were intended towards that. So I think that is what to be, and a whole lot of reforms happen. Now, today, it is mandatory for every company to have, every organization, not just a manufacturing, service, government, every entity has, to have 2.5% of their 2.5% of their workforce as apprentices, and they are free to start their own. See, earlier, the government used to be a bottleneck, right? That the new courses, new generation courses, if you send it to the erstwhile NCVT, they will take years to approve that. And by that time, the technology wave would have changed further, moved further, So today, the freedom has been given to the industry. You start your course, you define your curriculum, whatever is required. So there are designated trades in apprenticeship which are prescribed by the government, and there are optional trade which industry has full freedom. No approvals required from anybody. Because if they are good enough to manufacture, if they're good enough to add to the GDP of the country, if they're good enough to export, why shouldn't they be considered to be good enough to create a course, which will train people and which will make them marketable, their skills marketable, So I think these reforms have happened, but somehow I still feel industry has to embrace. I think where a gap has remained while government has reformed the Act, but it has the outreach to the industry has still not been good enough. To tell them that, look here, most of the pain areas, if you ask CEOs, there's still many of them are dreadful of the Act itself. In the old Act, there was a provision that the CEO can be put behind the bars. If there is a violation of the Act, you can't have them, people who are helping you at no cost, and all they're contributing to a nation building process. by having apprentices. Of course, it helps them also because, all apprentices who are of a good quality, they're absorbed by the company itself if the company is on the growth path and is adding people year on year, So I think, it's see, India is a country where a million mutinies happen all the time. All these battles, you have to have concurrent onslaught and, so I think that's the challenge, Santosh.
Very pertinent point. I mean, you answered my second question, which was an industry you already answered, so I'll not ask that question. But I would like to pick your brain on, we talked about exporting our skills, right? So India is by far the largest recipient of repatriated money that comes to the country, and in terms of the effects that we are building our base, it's just humongous, right? Now let's try and see if we can you identify which are the top three industries that would need exporting, and also top three industries that would need our skills to be deployed in India, right? I mean, for some of the folks who are young in the audience now, they might want to understand in the advent of AI, IoT, quantum, and the leaps of emergent technologies, where should he or she focus on? So three industries that you think, or three domains or sectors that you think have huge potential outside of India, and three have huge deployment requirements in India.
See, auto sector is one, and when I say auto, there's not one skill. There's a basket of skills, auto, and a typical old-fashioned auto technician or auto mechanic job role which existed, right? So that is important. But because India is becoming a auto is the largest segment in the manufacturing side. Auto, if memory doesn't fail me, almost 8 to 9%, if not 10, of our GDP comes from automobile. The entire GDP, not just the manufacturing GDP, comes from automobile sector itself. A very large chunk of manufacturing comes from auto. So I think auto is very important because, and it's not just for domestic requirement, but much of companies like Hyundai, Maruti, and so on and so forth, they are exporting big time, and India as a base, and that's one reason why Chennai, emerged as some kind of a Detroit of India, because it had a port, and cars could be exported, So I think that I would still bet that that's one sector and not just one skill. The basket of skills which a modern, fully, with a high degree of automation, a unit would require. I mean, newer, for example, Internet of Things. There are a lot of automatic controls and so on and so forth. I think those kind of things are very, very important for India. I would think even. So I will refrain from naming three here and three there as such. But if I give you a roundabout answer to that, so this is definitely for one. If you look at a lot of Indian labor goes to Middle East countries, right? But many of them go virtually. Some have some skills, but many of them are completely unskilled. Take this classic example of a driver, right? A car driver, right? I mean, if you go to a Middle East country, typically you'll find every second driver of Indian origin, kind of thing. But very few of them actually were drivers here, and then they went inside. They virtually went there as a human body, worked as a cleaner, and so on and so forth. And then they learned driving, and then they moved to the value chain. And many of them, they are not able to earn decent wages, and they come back. So reverse transition also happens, kind of thing. So I think these kind of skills, even the traditional ITI type of skills, if you update, if you modernize ITIs, if you bring industry partners in ITIs, because ITIs I see some kind of a construction defect, the way the model is constructed. I see a lot of gaps there. You have to have major industries take ownership of those ITIs and run those ITIs and their systems away from the clutches of the government, which is, the government can't expect that private sector will come and yet would dance to their tunes, right? While being compliant with a number of things. So actually, there has to, I will see government privatize ITIs through a very different route, but the government ITIs themselves could be taken over by the private sector. And by the industry and run it, and then a lot of these people who are going to, especially to Middle East, because that is the one country which has a critical mass of people going, with very, very rudimentary skills and not earning decent enough wages. They earn more than what they would have earned here. That's the reason they go. But, if you skill them in those areas, then they go a long time. I'm not adding ITS to any of those things, because there the model is perfected by the industry. So government interventions, in fact, some people joke that IT industry happened big time because there was no government, there was no ministry for IT for a very, very long time. And industry did everything. They took leadership, and thanks to some, pioneers like TCS and later entrants like Infosys and Wipro, they all put together, perfected the model, and go ahead. So I think, the construction is one, again, a very, 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 very big time, unit. I once went for a holiday to Kenya and Tanzania, and I saw in those countries some, roads and flyovers being built by labor which did not appear to be from Kenya and Tanzania. So I asked those people, they said they're all Chinese labor. I said, how does it become? They said that Chinese companies are, bidding there and winning the contract. I said, how can they? Because in China, the per capita income is higher. The payment of wages, I mean, the wage payments are higher than these countries. Then how are they viable? So, they were using their prisoners from jails and quickly training them and putting them in their jobs there, kind of a thing. So, and only taking care of their, obviously prisoners are not paid wages. So only taking care of their shelter and food and so on and so forth, So I think we have to look at, my problem in this country is very often we refuse to learn from China and say, oh, we are a democracy, where they are not a democracy. And then therefore they can do many things we cannot do. But there's still, just because you have a geopolitical differences from China, it doesn't stop we as a country from learning in many other areas, how they have made their universities world class, how they are able to produce Nobel laureates, each university in the US has more, the major ones, more Nobel laureates than we cumulatively in last 1 century we have, India as a country have. So we have to look at things very, very seriously and very differently. We have to be a nation in a hurry, because, otherwise we would have generations to come will never, forgive us for our tardiness. That's what I believe.
And I completely echo your thoughts. And there's a couple of questions from the audience I'd like to take. One of the question is also a list that I had from the list. It's a challenge of underemployment in the country today, right? A lot of people are not getting the right kind of jobs to the full potential of the education that they've done, or to the full potential that the skills that they might have acquired, right? There is, in the industry, we call it as silent quitting, or,
Sorry, the last word?
The silent quitting. In the industry, we call it as silent quitting, right? People just do their allotted task and go out because they're not really able to execute their skills that are available to them. Or it could be as simple as, a lot of people from the higher education ground, maybe not from the great universities or the top-notch universities, but they're not getting the right kind of employment. So you also look at the kind of quantum of people who are applying for the government jobs. That doesn't seem to subside at all, right? That continuously keeps increasing, not just absolute numbers, even as a pro rata percentage number of graduates coming out is still in the higher numbers on their side. Is there some action or some intervention being already done towards reducing that underemployment, where a person highly skilled is doing a low and menial kind of a job from his point of view?
So, Santosh, it's a complex question. It has multiple questions rolled into one, actually. One is that there has to be, greater focus on sectors which have a huge employment creation, so that the employment numbers look better. That's on the one side, right? Other side is our education and skill development. Both sectors today are completely, with very, very small exceptions here and there, are completely, supply driven. They are not demand driven at all, So what happens once you create overcapacity for some skills, overcapacity for some disciplines of education, and an industry struggling so there's a problem is, on one hand, industry struggles to find the people that of a certain skill set that they want, right? On the other hand, there's a glut of people who are not able to find proper employment, or as you said, they're underemployed, right? Kind of a thing. So I think I go back to what I had said earlier, the proper demand supply estimation is very, very important for a country as a whole. And it can't be one static exercise. The market forces, the technology waves are so dynamic. They're changing all the time. Obsolescence is so fast, the business models the older ones are cracking down and newer ones are emerging. So everything is changing. It has to be an ongoing, I would say, a EY or a PwC or KPMG of a kind, entire company put into this work has to, not just as a paid study of a few lakh rupees, I mean, their massive engine has to be deployed by the government or commissioned by the government to have this kind of a study ongoing all the time, so that these imbalances don't happen. And people get educated, and then, they get educated in areas for which the demand is not adequate. And there are problems of industry still, sometimes I get a feeling that many in the industry, they pay the lip service. They don't pay them adequately. Still, because of the demand and supply forces are such that many in the industry still don't compensate the skilled people differently from unskilled people, because they feel while they'll prefer employing skilled people, but they are not prepared to pay that proper premium. Some premium they may pay, but not enough for the person to justify that, So I think millions of those things have to happen together. The entire skill development sector has to become more demand-driven than just being supply-based. More focus on by government on sectors where employment is happening, and whole lot of skill gap studies so that it is properly calibrated, and skills happen in areas where they're more relevant and they're likely to find local this thing, and some realization by the government, by the industry, that yes, they have to pay skilled people a premium that they deserve, just because there's so many people here, and
availability is high, so you might as well
chasing, knocking the doors of employment market. You can't take them for granted. You have to, if you really want their loyalty, if they want them to a higher productivity from them, you have to pay premium. There is no doubt about that,
Sure. So I think that's a point well taken. So I think a dynamic study, like census, I would like to say, but although we have not done census regularly now, but something that is more periodic and regular in nature, that the study is done, and that data is opened up for the industry to consume. While we speak about industry, one thing that I've often heard, or even in the financial reports that we see, is that a certain percentage of your CSR budget gets allocated to various other, depending on the industry where you allocate it to your area of sphere. And for
sorry,
a large while,
Santosh, could you repeat that?
So I was talking about if you look at the financial reports of the listed companies, they allocate certain percentage towards the CSR budget, right? And
2% of their net profit,
2%, right?
average net profit of last 3 years.
Correct. And while education is one of the cornerstones, many industries or many large corporates do pledge money into, why hasn't that really created the impact that we would expect from the likes of the TCS or the Infosys in the service sector, or it could be in automotive sector from the Bajaj of the world? Why hasn't really impacted and shifted the gears towards skilling there, right? I mean, well, education
Shifted
is
the gears
towards really upskilling the country, right? While they are putting in that money, there's tremendous amount of talks are being done, speeches being given about that. Is that enough from your point of view, or do you think there's more momentum required for these industries to come together and deploy much larger funds to move the upskilling journey of India?
So I studied the CSR spent by Indian corporates, and I'm sure this is about 2 years, 3 years back, and I'm sure not much has changed. Almost half of the CSR, see, that time the entire industry put together, the CSR spend in actual crores and rupees, if memory doesn't fail me, was about 18,000 crores, CSR spent by the industry, the 2% of net profits, and almost 50% of it was going into education. Skills was not even available. Separately, the figure was not even available. Whatever little way, I have a feeling very small part of it is going towards skills. It was there. Almost 25% was there for healthcare, and remaining 25% for all kinds of things, put together. My feeling is barely 5% of the money of the 50% which goes into education is available for skill development. I mean, initially we had to work when I was in the government. We had to work with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs along with my ministry, to get skilling included in that list of things you can do under CSR. So that was included. But I think far more has to happen, and this has to go beyond CSR. If we'll only expect CSR money to be put in skilling, it will never be enough, because then it'll always be a question of education versus CSR versus healthcare versus environment protection, climate change action, and so on and so forth. There'll always be a gender sensitivity and so on and so forth. There'll always be a conflict of that kind. But industry has to really go, as I said earlier, a fantastic job of skilling for their own people. Look at our own, the Infosys, TCS, their training campuses. They're the fabulous training they do, right? But why can't they do it for their employees, right? Or the trainees who are on the verge of becoming an employee, right? Why can't they do it for a much larger scale for the community, And obviously, money doesn't grow on trees. The government has to work out very imaginative ways of putting those bills of some kind, because the quality will only come like that. So I think I've seen Tata Motors plant, I've seen Bosch's plant, so many ICICI has done it. Many industry people have done it. Mahindras have done it. So I think it has to be scaled up. The scale is just not there, and I would say you have to go. The play has to go beyond within CSR kitty itself, with a very small money going to skills, right? Skill development, and but it has to go beyond that. Industry has to take the ownership and do the same quality of training for training the community, and whatever financial gaps are the commercial gaps are there could be funded by the government. That's there has to be a proper model to do that. But I think it has to be there, because no matter what you do in a lookalike training facility or a training provider, as the government says, you can never replicate the quality which the industry-led training centers have, or apprenticeship programs have. So I would feel apprenticeship a lot. Three industry sectors you asked earlier. I would say that step up apprenticeship big time. Encourage industry to run skill development courses, which they do at their own academies and training programs for the community at large, and reduce the play of training providers, because there are also some fly-by-night operators which have come. I think there's no doubt about that. Not everybody is scrupulous enough, and that's very important. And together with that, as I said, Industry 4.0 thing is very important. The new education policy talks about skilling happening from the secondary education level it's onwards, and the substantive part, they have committed some percentage that even universities, certain percentage of university education would be into the skills, and universities should no longer act as a high priest of higher education. They must embrace skills, very, very important. And last, if I'm, lot of efforts have to be made to make skilling aspirational. That's very important. Skilling is still not aspirational. I still don't come across matrimonial ads which talk about, I want a plumber, boy for my girl. So I think, or electrician, partner, for my girl. I still don't. So I think and that cannot happen. How we treat skilled people. Let us be honest. When an electrician or a plumber comes to our home, how many of us make him or her, him largely because it's a very, very male dominated, we make him sit on a sofa? How many of us, and no matter whatever bill he has come up with, every time we'll negotiate, as if the entire money saving we'll do would be through the paltry sum the person has demanded, right? Nobody will offer a cup of coffee or a tea, or even if somebody does, We'll not use our mainstream crockery and give it. We'll give it one of those discarded ones and give tea or coffee to the person. So our attitude has to change. It doesn't happen. For many Indians who have lived abroad for long, they've seen that how they are treated with respect and dignity. How do you bring dignity into our skills? It's very, very important. Otherwise, you'll only have the leftovers of the mainstream education boarding the skills bus, which is not good enough for a country. If you're really serious about leveraging a demographic dividend.
Thank you so much, Jed. I think this has been really insightful for me personally. I mean, I've been reading about this for a while, and also it's an area of interest for me. But I mean, you opened up so many different paradigms to think deeper into and see how we as a society can really ensure that we are contributing towards the upscaling of the country as well. Right? I think it's been a well spent 1 hour from my side, and I'm sure our audience things are like with me. So I'll just try to summarize on what all we covered.
So Santosh, sorry, sure. just 30 seconds of interruption.
Sure.
If all the people, there were 100+ people participating in this session, if all of us can take a call that we will treat the skilled people in our day-to-day walk of life that we encounter with dignity. We'll treat them as human beings. We treat them as a part. I think that's one battle won. And secondly, if each one of us helps at least one more person to become a skilled person by guiding them, mentoring them, taking them, even those of us who can afford by, picking their bills for skills education, I think the country would be very, very different. Sorry, Santosh, I interrupted.
Absolutely, I think that made sense, and I was actually put it in the comment saying that I'm taking the primary role on it. I'll take a note on that. I think it really changes the way that we use our own friends and network that we can influence on, and to ensure that each person tells another person to ensure that we connect back to our roots and start bringing dignity towards the labor. I think that's one thing that societally we should be doing, right? And I think thank you so much for bringing that up, and I'll also put it in the comment, and I see a couple of people are seconding my thoughts. Thank you so much, Dr. John and others, Adarsh Pandey, for joining that group. So to summarize, we spoke about the need for study of the gap in the demand versus supply. Like you rightly said, the biggest challenge that we find today is we are a supply-driven skilling economy vis-a-vis where we have to be is more a demand-driven, where the industry pulls the cart ahead. Instead, we saying that we have 150 engineering colleges, we keep supplying engineers while you might need a doctor or a plumber, which is a different skill together, right? So that's one key takeaway. We also spoke about some of the key industries that could be the big growth engines for the country, both in India and outside. So we spoke about automotive industry, construction space. We spoke about the newest technologies in the AI, the automation space, or the IoTs of the world, where I think India has a very big chance to really grow and build our skill momentum there. We also spoke about the gap between the education and skill development sector. I think that still continues to be there. So industry can play a very vital role. So while we spoke about society and as individuals what we can contribute, industry has a much bigger responsibility on its shoulders to really take a leaf out of their own internal training and open those playbooks to the world, to other. It could be universities, it could be government divisions or departments, or it could be even other tertiary players who can come and take those initiatives that are done internally and make it much more formalized towards the larger economy. One interesting point that you touched upon was, that has stayed with me, is about the migration that we speak about, right? Someone from a tier 2, tier 3 Bharat coming to the urban India. Again, even this migration is becoming a friction as we speak, because of the cost of living versus the underemployment or the underutility of skill set that we do. We spoke about that, and we looked at how if we can really take our knowledge and skills back to the tier 2, tier 3 regions of India, that would also solve some of the social inequalities that we find in the urban India today. And then you also walked through about the government initiatives and how we could learn some of the take some leaf out of China's success stories there, right? So it could be as simple as looking at the university model. I've been fortunate to do some work with Dr. Suryarangan on the national new education policy, and this is precisely what he was telling about. It's one to do a policy; it's another much bigger aspect to start implementing that. It needs multiple players to come together to really execute that in a cohesive way. I think you rightly mentioned about how these three pillars, right, society, industry, and the academia can come together with the support of government. It could be in various types of incentives in terms of like what we spoke of the PLI, and this similar incentives can be put in to ensure that the industry is able to really put their not just CSR but non-CSR money as well to ensure that they are contributing more to the country's growth. Thank you so much for. I hope I summarized in a nice way to cover up all the topics that we spoke about, yeah. Jayant, and it was a pleasure having you here. I think it was 1 hour well spent on a Friday evening. I thank all my audience for taking time out on a Friday evening and spending that with us. I think this is a great nation building activity that we are currently witnessing in how the skill development can actually make or break the country. Like Jayant said, we are going to grow really old as a society, right? Because medical industry has ensured that we have better health and we continue to live long. And in my domain of banking, we have something called as longevity financing. That's become a new study by RBI now, looking at how does one ensure that you still have a reasonably dignified life after 60, after retirement, while there's no pension. So that's, I think, something very important for us to also keep in mind. Each of us can contribute to the betterment of nation, and I welcome you all for joining YLC in whatever capacity you can contribute to the young leaders community. We will be happy to encourage and join hands with you all. Rhythm will reach out to you if you need any help or any clarity on that. Finally, I'll thank you again, Jayant, for taking time out and really walking us through all these important aspects of the skilling, which has been like an insightful for me at least. I mean, I've learned a great deal of activity today on this. Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great weekend. We'll see you with a new session around some interesting topics around new age technologies in the next coming session. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Santosh, for being such a wonderful host, and Rhythm for being such an excellent support system. Thank you. Pleasure.